everybody. Welcome to the NIELPA podcast. I am your host, Dr. Joby Lawrence, and today we're joined by a familiar and inspiring voice in the field, Dr. David Holbrook. He is NIELPA's executive director and former president, and David has worn a number of hats in terms of his leadership at NIELPA. He's been a guiding force in shaping the current mission, the growth of the organization, and we're just really thrilled to have him here today to share reflections on the organization's evolution and just a little sneak peek into what's ahead at the NIALPA conference. So welcome, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
So David, I know personally that you have served NIALPA in multiple roles over the years because you and I have intersected in multiple ways throughout the NIALPA organization history. Can you tell us just a little bit about how the organization has evolved and then what continues to energize you in terms of your leadership as executive director?
Sure. I've been with the organization since 2009. And during the 2008, 2009 school years, when I really got into the federal education side of things, I became the Title III director in Wyoming and related with our Title I director. And Title I had their own national association. And I was always like, where's Title III's? And then in October of what was that? 2008. There was this LEP partnership meeting that the U.S. Department of Education hosted and brought all these people together. And so that LEP was limited English proficient, that former term that we don't use anymore because it's deficit based. But they brought, all these people together, the L coordinators, Title III directors, and Title I directors. And the president of the National Title I Association got up and spoke for a little bit, and then they called up this guy and never seen him before, never heard of him. And he said he was president of the name of the organization before NAILPA was the National Council of State Title III Directors. And he was like, yeah, I'm president of the National Council of State Title III Directors. And I'm not going to tell you his name or where he's from or anything because I was totally unimpressed. But I thought this is the organization that we need right now because, Title I has their group and it's, they've got that representation. And so I started checking into this organization, and that particular president didn't believe that our organization needed to exist. And halfway through his presidency, stopped hosting board meetings. And it was tough to do anything because at the time we weren't a nonprofit and we weren't, didn't have bylaws, any way to control anything. So the board just didn't meet for half a year. And then when they started meeting, they held elections to fill the empty board positions. And the incoming president, great man named Dr. Pedro Ruiz, he was Title III in New York at the time. He really helped pull us out of this situation. And we got some good board members in there, and we came up with a 5-year plan. One of the things was we were going to get nonprofit status, which included having to create bylaws. The other was establish a national conference, annual national conference. And our first annual national conference was in 2010. So this is our 15th anniversary, 16th anniversary coming up in 2006 for the national conference. But I got elected to the board. I started as secretary. Then I was president-elect. Then I was president. And in my year as past president, less than a month into that year, both the president and the president-elect took positions that didn't allow them to continue on the board. And the vice president ended up no, it was the president-elect and vice president who took positions that didn't allow them to stay on the board. And the current president's parents, both of their health went down, and she took early retirement. And so suddenly we had a void in leadership. And so before we lost a quorum on the board, the existing board voted to have me come back as president for a second year. So I think I'm the only, Megan Elabicki Flick has been great. She's been president twice. But I was president 2 consecutive years, which was a unique situation. So, but then I left Wyoming Department of Education and went to work for an education vendor. And I was expecting to kind of roll out of my work with NELPA. And they asked me to be an advisor, and you can be an advisor for 3 years. So at the end of my 3 years, I was expecting to roll off again. And they decided the incoming president was like, "You've been here for so long, we don't want to lose you, but we don't have a way to keep you on the board right now. So we're going to change the bylaws. We're going to, at the time it was allowable, and it still is, to have what's called honorary members that basically get membership for the year. And so they added a clause in there that honorary members could serve as an advisor to the board at the invitation of the president. Made me first honorary member and invited me to participate in the board. So I was like, okay, I'll help you out. Excuse me. Since that was the desire there.
Mhm.
And at during that board year, we were really growing at that point in time. When I joined, we had about $2,000 in the bank and 25 members. And by that time we were getting up over 200 members, and we had a regular budget of 40, $50,000. So it was a significant jump in terms of the membership and our budget and the things we were able to do. Because of that growth, there was a recognition that we needed someone who was not a state or district director, who could represent the organization. And so they decided to hire an executive director.
Mhm.
Um, I was pretty much doing that kind of work without pay. And I think I made like $2 or $3 an hour in the first year when I actually took on the role. But at the time I was thinking, okay, great, they're going to hire somebody, and I'll be, I'll roll off the board, and we'll get some fresh leadership in there. And no, they came back and said, we want you to apply for the job. So here I still am as executive director, several years later. Um, but it's been a long journey with this
Mhm.
organization. I think
Yeah.
I'm 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 in my 16th year working with the board right now.
Yeah.
And it's the growth that I've seen and the leadership that we've had. I mean, you're a past president.
Yeah.
Every once in a while we end up at a conference with a bunch of people, and there's like 5 or 6 past presidents just
Uh-huh.
hanging around the booth chatting, because once
Yeah.
you get involved in this organization,
Yep.
it's like family.
Yeah.
And so it's so great to see everyone. And we try to get those pictures of past presidents, so that we have some kind of documentation. But yeah, in terms of, the different things that I've done, that's with NELPA, that's
Mhm.
kind of my journey to get me to where I am now. Um, so I don't know, is that,
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think just, something you mentioned is I do agree. The mission and vision of what NIALPA stands for is so compelling that once you get involved, you stay involved. So, I mean, to your point, yes, I was past president. Obviously, to be past president, you've had to have been on the board, then in a role, getting to vice president. So it's like, you're on the board for a while before you take on a president's role. And I've stayed connected as well. So after I left the State Department, you and I met when I was at the Iowa Department of Education. You were at the Wyoming Department of Education. So we connected way back when.
Hmm.
And we both have stayed connected, even as our roles have changed and we shifted out of SEA roles. We've found a way to stay connected with NIALPA and support NIALPA. And I think that you're right. We will talk to a lot of people who do something very similar. And I love the idea of getting us together for another past president's photo this year at the conference. So I have to start gearing up for that and reaching out to all the past presidents. But I do think you're absolutely right. It's an organization that has such a valuable mission and vision that it doesn't take much to just get in there and take ownership of it and get excited and passionate about it. So excited to be here with you today to talk a little more about that. I know one of the strengths of NIALPA is bridging policy and classroom practice, and that's been something that has been a focus over the years, and it's looked different and sounded different, at different times. But how will this year's conference reflect that mission, and why do you think it's more important than ever to make those connections?
I know this year's conference is going to have some focus on um, a lot of the issues around what's happening at the federal level,
Mm,
just because of the uncertainty related to funding and other things. And just the very fact that there's so much happening in our field that when you look at the different presentations and topics, uh, we're always trying to find presentations that basically touch the needs or meet the needs or help provide, something in the area uh, for
mhm,
those folks who are looking for answers. Right now, you know, the different committees are working on things that are trying to address issues that are, you know, of importance. The LEA committee right now, I work with them a lot. They're trying to develop a document that provides citations of requirements for English learners in Title I and what that means and some best practices around that. Because of the threats to Title III, if Title III goes away, that doesn't mean requirements in ESSA go away for English learners.
mhm. Yeah.
And you'll hear me say this more than once, that there are more requirements related to English learners in Title I than there are in Title III. And
Mhm,
they're of more significance and more impactful. Accountability, school improvement, all of those things English learners have ties to. A standards and assessment,
mhm,
parent-family communication, the letter that goes to parents, all of that is required in Title I, not Title III. So
mhm,
it's a huge um, misconception that everything related to English learners is in Title III.
mhm.
If you have English learners and you're working in federal programs, send them to Title III. Yeah, there's so much in Title I that folks just don't pay attention to. Um,
Mm,
but in terms of the conference, I've taken less of a role in the planning of it. When because of the fact that we've hired an outreach and events coordinator,
mhm.
and she does a great job, and and they're working hard to try to make sure that the presentations and the keynotes that we provide are impactful in the field.
Awesome. Well, are there any new features, session formats, focus areas in this year's conference that you're especially excited about?
I guess the big thing that's changed that we're looking at changing is we feel like as an organization we do our virtual side really well. So we've done hybrid conferences since
Yeah.
COVID. So we do the virtual side really well, we feel like. We
Awesome.
also do the in-person side really well. But it's often really difficult to manage the technology and schedules and coordination when you try to do the virtual and the live in person together. So this year we're actually separating that out and we're doing only in person during February
Okay.
at the conference. And then we'll have a virtual component later in the year. We haven't
Okay.
set dates or figured all of that out yet. We're working very hard right now to get everything in place for the conference for this year, for 2026. So the in-person side. And once we have the more details in place, we'll start working on
Okay.
scheduling and presentations and things like that for the
Awesome.
virtual side.
Yeah, and I know the theme this year is built to last, which, I really, again, I just so much appreciate the focus on the systems thinking around that type of a theme where, things are changing rapidly, the landscape's changing rapidly. When we have systems in place that are built to last, they withstand those changes, those shifts, and those policy things that are going on right now. So do you want to say anything more about just that theme and the connection to systems type work?
Well, when I think about the theme this year, and I haven't been as entrenched in the organization of the conference as I mentioned,
Mm,
but the theme, the Built to Last theme, to me is really significant when we look at what's happening in the federal context because we need to take everything into consideration. And we've seen, the Department of Justice memo that says they're not going to enforce, you know, disparate impacts, which is, discrimination. One of the theories of discrimination based on how people are impacted if something isn't done. Like it's not like you're purposely discriminating. But disparate impact says, hey, if you're not providing an English learner program, technically you're discriminating against English learners because you're, by not providing that, excluding them from participating in the educational program. So
Mm-hmm.
that disparate impact concept under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, the Department of Justice issued a memo saying they're not going to enforce that anymore. So one of the things that we did was we put out a position statement that basically said, you know, disparate impacts is actually encoded in law
Mm-hmm.
in the Equal Educational Opportunities Act.
Yeah.
So here's my geeky side. It's 20 USC 1703F. So that's your reference to find out where that actually is in the law. So it's encoded in law, but they're trying to say this. So for us to, you know, as an organization, when we think about it, we need to look at what we can build on.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that we have these attacks against things like disparate impact, but we can come back and say, yeah, you don't need to, if you don't want to enforce it there, it's in the law here. You know, they're not enforcing the guidance related to disparate impact, but the court cases and the fact that it's actually written into law provides the foundation to justify continuing to act on that concept of disparate impact. So
Yeah.
we need to, in terms of that building things that last, we're not only talking about policy, but we're also
Mm-hmm.
talking about practice.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of discussion on science of reading, and there's been some good information put out there about how to use science of reading with multilingual learners.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, taking those types of concepts and trying to put them into a context where we can build on it
Yeah.
is where I really see that some of the focus of this conference is. And I'll just say one more thing. And this is something that I harp on is so often education policy moves forward without consideration for English learners. And they
Mm-hmm.
get towards the end, and then somebody pops up and says, well, what about English learners?
Mm-hmm.
At that point in time, they go, oh, yeah, and they try to retrofit things,
Mm-hmm.
so that, oh, let's retrofit English learners in there.
Yeah.
And we need to be more proactive as uh, L administrators and leaders so that we're not popping up at the end. We're popping up at the beginning and in the middle. Um, I heard this quote. It's not from me. I'd love to take credit for it, but the quote is like this, and this is what really stands out to me is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah. I was thinking that when you said that, honestly, I was thinking about that quote. And so I think that's something that NIALPA and other national organizations have been willing and able to step up and have the hard conversations that need to be had. I think there's sometimes where state educational agencies or LEAs, when these things are happening, maybe are either encouraged to keep your head down, stay out of the conversation, just keep doing the work. But if it weren't for national organizations like NIALPA stepping up and putting out the counter argument or the counter perspective, or just pointing out the fact that you just stated, which is just because a guidance document is rescinded, just because belief structures of this current administration are not necessarily favorable to our students who are English learners, multilingual learners, that doesn't mean the laws are no longer in place and that we don't have to abide by the laws. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions and perceptions out there, and I'm just so proud of NIALPA and a lot of other nonprofits across the country that are saying, hey, you know what, wait a minute. We're going to have a counter narrative to what's going on out there because these are our kids, these are our families, and they're here in the United States contributing in big ways to our economy, in big ways to our communities, in big ways to our cultures. And sometimes that's not a popular thing to do when you stand up against, some of the really harmful and hurtful rhetoric that's out there. But I just really appreciate the courage of so many, organizations and people and individuals who have been willing to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right. Like, these our students and our families, we all have human rights. And whether OCR or DOJ or, Department of Education is going to enforce certain things is irrelevant to whether or not those certain things are still legally required and human decency
Yeah.
advised, So, I mean, I just really appreciate that the role that NIOP has taken and the types of policy statements you put out and just the organization of some of these meetings and things that you guys have participated in. So I just wanted to thank you personally for that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And I'll just follow up and just say one of the big pieces that a lot of folks don't understand is guidance is not binding.
Yeah,
And
right.
so if you rescind guidance, that
Mhm.
guidance is put out there to help you understand what's legally required. If you rescind that guidance, that doesn't rescind what's still legally required, as you were saying.
Right, right.
And so that is an important thing to note,
Mhm.
because there are guidance documents that have been rescinded,
Yeah.
some important guidance
Yeah.
documents, but those, guidance is put out to help you understand what you're supposed to do based on the law. So that
Mhm.
law hasn't gone away.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just, to a point you made about if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu. I think many of us are fortunate enough to be in positions where we have some influence. And there's never a better time than now to step up and use what influence we have to protect a group of students and families who are, I'm just going to say it, on the menu right now.
Yeah,
And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be in a place in my career where I can do that, for you to be in a place in your career where you can do that. And I just want to encourage folks to continue to use the influence you have, the human decency that you have to continue to advocate for our students and our families who deserve equal access to education and opportunities.
100%. When guidance is rescinded, the assumption comes down, and I've actually heard districts
Yeah.
tell state
Mhm.
administrators, well, they rescinded that guidance, we don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And we need, as education leaders, to help people understand guidance is non-binding, the law
Mhm.
is, and
Yeah.
that guidance is to provide you understanding on how to implement the law. Just because the guidance goes away doesn't
Mhm.
mean you still don't have to implement that law. And
Right.
the when you see an organization, when you see an administration pulling back on those guidance documents and rescinding them and pulling things down, it sends a message that
Mhm.
you don't have to do this, but that's not what's going on.
Right.
And like you
Right.
said, we need to get that word out. And
Yeah.
and I'm glad to be in the position to be able to help do
Mhm.
that. And I know you are
Yeah,
too.
me too. Absolutely. So, sort of in a final closing statement, what would you say to educators, state leaders, or even policy influencers who haven't yet engaged with NIALPA? Why is now the time to plug in?
Well, I mean, NELPA's motto is we're the voice for ELs, voice for multilingual learners. And when you look at us as an organization, we're in a unique position. We are an organization of program administrators. NELPA is National Association of English Learner Program Administrators.
Hmm.
We're focused on the leaders and trying to support leaders. You have TESOLs and NABEs and other organizations that are great supports for teachers, for bilingual ed, for other specific purposes, but our purpose is to provide support and assistance to, you know, we focus on multilingual learners, their parents and families, and the educators who support them. And in working with the leadership, we're trying to train up those leaders for this generation who can stand up. So if you are working in the field, working with English learners, and you want to get involved with an organization that's developing leaders for now and the future, NELPA is the organization to get involved with. We are the organization that the now decimated Office of English Language Acquisition has chosen to partner with. And we have representation in the board meetings from the U.S. Department of Education related to, what's happening with English learners. Yeah, in the past that we had significant representation, now we just have one person who joins, and we need to continue to support that person at the U.S. Department of Ed. But if you want to direct line into what's going on in, at the federal level with English learners, we have that direct line as well. And so if you're interested at all in what's happening in the field and the leadership, um, getting involved in any kind of leadership, this is the organization to work with.
I absolutely 100% agree. So, David, thank you for your steadfast leadership and for sharing your vision and your experiences with us today. Your continued commitment to both policy and practice inspires us all to keep pushing forward for the success of every one of our students and every one of our families. And I want to thank our listeners and viewers for tuning in. Do not miss your chance to be part of this year's NIALPA conference. You can visit www.nialpa.org to learn more, register, and connect with the growing network of advocates just like you. We hope to see you there. And until next time, stay committed, stay curious, and stay connected. Thanks, David.
Thank you.